Visitors could soon be banned from entering Lake Eyre under a plan to protect the popular Outback tourist destination for its traditional owners.
And by the time Lake Eyre fills, then dries out and then fills again, well, the current crop of political leaders, they might be long forgotten.
Indigenous people, the latest place to now be banned from public without permission is Lake Eyre.
What if I told you that Australia once had a secret plan to spend $200 billion creating its own Mediterranean Sea right in the middle of the desert? And what if I told you that this absolutely insane idea is making a comeback because climate scientists think it might be our only hope against catastrophic drought? Sounds like something out of a Mad Max movie, right? But mate, this is real, and the story behind it will blow your mind. Before we dive into Australia's most insane engineering dream, if you want uncensored analysis of the mega projects and secret plans that could reshape our continent, join our Patreon. We're the resistance exposing the massive schemes that mainstream media won't investigate. Link in the description. So let me take you back to 1938. John Bradfield, the same bloke who designed the Sydney Harbour Bridge, had just finished the most iconic piece of engineering in Australian history. But instead of taking a well-deserved break, he came up with an idea so ambitious it makes the bridge look like a backyard project.
That this core of the city that we're building will be called Bradfield in honour of that outstanding engineer who shaped much of Sydney's transport network, who had the vision and also the carry-through regarding the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and who's inspired generations of engineers.
Bradfield wanted to flood Lake Eyre, not just a bit of water here and there. He wanted to create a permanent inland sea stretching over 1,000 kilometres across the Outback. We're talking about turning 17% of the entire Australian continent into a massive lake. His plan was to build a 2,300 kilometre network of dams, pumps and canals to redirect Queensland's tropical rivers into the Lake Eyre basin. Think of it as Australia's version of the Panama Canal, except instead of connecting oceans, it would terraform a desert. And here's the really mental part. Lake Eyre is already 15 metres below sea level. It's like nature built a giant bathtub in the middle of Australia and just forgot to fill it up. Bradfield figured all we had to do was turn on the tap. The numbers are absolutely staggering. We're talking about moving 300 cubic kilometres of water. That's equivalent to 600 Sydney harbours or 12 billion Olympic swimming pools. In the middle of a desert where temperatures hit 40 degrees and water evaporates 10 times faster than it rains. But here's what makes this story even more incredible. An inland sea actually existed in Australia before. The Eromanga Sea covered much of Central Australia between 140 and 100 million years ago. We've got fossils of prehistoric marine reptiles and giant sea creatures right there in the red centre. So Bradfield wasn't trying to create something completely new. He was unconsciously trying to restore what nature had built millions of years ago. It's like the land was calling out to be flooded again. And you know what? Lake Eyre still floods naturally every decade or so. Just this year, in May 2025, it filled up for the fourth time in 160 years. NASA was tracking it from space as this massive pulse of water transformed the desert into a shimmering oasis practically overnight. When it floods, Lake Eyre becomes this incredible tourist magnet. People fly in from all over the world to see this rare ecological event, but within a few years, it's back to being a salt-crusted wasteland because there's no outlet. Water flows in, but never flows out. So why didn't Bradfield's scheme happen? Well, it turns out physics is a real pain in the backside when you're trying to flood a desert. The engineers did the math and realised that evaporation would drain the sea faster than the rivers could fill it. Even with Bradfield's massive canal system, the basin would lose 3 metres of water every single year. That means you'd need to keep pumping water in forever just to maintain the lake level. And then there's the salt problem. Without an outlet, all the minerals and salt would just accumulate until you'd created the Dead Sea down under on steroids. Nothing could live in it. Nothing could grow around it. The cost estimate started at £40 million in 1938 money, but by the time engineers really looked at it properly, they were talking about $200 billion in today's dollars. That's more than Australia spends on defence, education and health combined. By the 1970s, the whole scheme was shelved. The Soviet Union's Aral Sea disaster had shown the world what happens when you mess with river systems. The Aral Sea shrank by 90% and created toxic dust storms that poisoned entire regions. But here's where the story gets really interesting. In 2020, the idea came back. This time, instead of diverting rivers, engineers proposed using solar-powered desalination plants on the coast to pump seawater 600 kilometres inland. The logic is actually pretty clever. Use salt water instead of fresh water. Power the whole thing with renewable energy, and you avoid the river diversion problems that killed the original scheme. Plus, salt water evaporates slower than fresh water, so you might actually be able to maintain the lake level. Climate scientists are getting excited about this because they think an inland sea could create lake effect weather patterns that increase rainfall across the region by up to 15%. In a country that's getting hit by more severe droughts every year, that could be a game changer. But the critics are firing back just as hard. The cost is still astronomical, $200 billion plus just for the pipelines, and if you're using salt water, you're basically sterilising the soil around the lake. No agriculture, no vegetation, just a giant salt lake in the middle of nowhere. You know what? Part of me still loves the audacity of this idea. There's something quintessentially Australian about looking at the biggest, driest, most impossible piece of real estate on the continent and thinking, yeah, let's turn that into a sea. Maybe that's why the idea keeps coming back. Every generation of engineers looks at lake air and thinks they can crack the code that defeated everyone before them. It's like Australia's version of climbing Mount Everest. Completely impractical, incredibly dangerous, but irresistible to people who think big. Will it ever happen? Probably not. The physics are brutal, the costs are insane, and the cultural damage would be irreversible. But as climate change makes Australia's droughts more severe, don't be surprised if this crazy idea surfaces again. After all, we're the country that lost a war against emus. If anyone's going to try flooding a desert with $200 billion worth of seawater, it's probably going to be us. To see the latest Australian crisis, click this video here.